Hey, what's going on here?
It's Taco Tuesday!
I can see that, but you all know we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, right? Seems like Taco Tuesday would be canceled, or postponed at the very least.
Yeah, but you said we should do some good in the world, like feed the hungry.
I did say that, but feeding zombies tacos isn't what I had in mind.
Well, then you should have been more specific.
I feel like common sense should have stepped in there.
No! Get back! Now!
Alright, what's going on here?
This zombie is being picky!
She wants brains. Do you have brains for the tacos?
No! We just have ground beef! Or, at least I think it's ground beef. It came from Taco Bell!
Huh. Well, in that case, it should be close enough to brains where they wouldn't notice the difference. You know, this is precisely why I said you shouldn't be feeding zombies. They have far more discerning taste buds than you would expect. Oh, wait, no, I got my zombie languages mixed up. She's asking for a tortilla instead of a hard shell. We've got those, don't we?
No, we only have hard shells. J.M. Gooding says we didn't need tortillas. Yeah, he said you preferred hard shells.
Ugh. Of course he did.
Ah! This one's eating me! I don't want to be a taco! Ooh, pick me! I want to be a taco!
Nobody is going to be a taco. I'm ending this intro before things get out of hand. Alright, just remain calm, clear your head, empty all your thoughts. Pretend you're listening to a mindless podcast like, I don't know, Saved as Draft. Okay, first of all, not cool. And secondly, there's no way that's going to work.
Oh, wow! That worked! I'm saved!
Ugh. Of course that worked. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 62 of the Saved as Draft podcast. After some time with family last week, I've been catching back up this week, and that means today's episode is once again almost normal. Most of the segments you know and love are here, just not all of them. In general, I wanted to say that Saved as Draft downloads have been lower than normal the last month, so I'm always thinking about ways to improve the show or to make it more valuable for my fellow writers. Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. I'm not like reporting to a board of investors or anything. But if you have any thoughts or comments on how the show can be changed or improved, where it might be able to reach more people, I'd love to hear them. So be sure to share those in the comments of the show, wherever you listen. Feedback is always, always welcome. All that aside, today's episode is still packed. We've got our weekly shoutouts. We're back to reviewing Power Up prompt stories this week as well. And after that, I'll be sitting down with our Flash Fiction February 2026 middleweight bracket winner, J.M. Gooding, for a full interview featuring questions submitted by the community. And once that's done, we'll wrap things up with a look at next week on Substack. So, lots going on as always, and plenty to share in terms of updates. But first, let's take a look at this week's Community Spotlight. This week, I'd like to highlight my friend and fellow Audio Mazes author, Richard Pack. Richard and I met through Audio Mazes, but we also attend a weekly writing group together on Discord. His wife Daria is also on Substack, and she goes to that same writing group. We love a good writing power couple. Richard was my guest on the show a while back, and if you have yet to hear his interview, I'll link that episode in the show notes. It's one of my favorites that I've done. He's a very down-to-earth person, but his imagination is truly incredible. I dare say he is one of the best world builders I've ever read. Seriously, every time I read his work, I learned something new about how to craft believable, vibrant, and lived-in worlds. His work spans from horror to fantasy and sci-fi as well, much like my own stories. He's a powerhouse of a writer and a great friend to boot. So, a big thank you to Richard for being part of the community, and be sure to check out his profile and interview in the show notes. Alright, that's housekeeping sorted. Let's dive into this week's shoutouts right after a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is sponsored by Florida Zombie Tours. Get up and close with hunters, gatherers, and more. perfect for fans of J.M. Gooding's Stillwater series.
Alright, friends, and if you look to your right, you can see a pack of freshly turned hunters. Now remember, hunters are fast, so...
Ah! He's eating me!
keep your hands and feet inside the ride at all times. Oh well, that happens sometimes, folks. All part of the package when you're visiting the Sunshine State.
Hey, wait a second. You're saying this is normal?
Please hold all your questions until the end of the tour. But yes, this is just how Florida normally is.
Yeah, he's right. I grew up here.
And if you look to your left, you can see a group of gatherers. These ones are much slower.
Oh wow, they're kind of cute in an undead rotting sort of way.
You and I have very different definitions of the word cute.
Alright, folks, who wants to go to Disney World next?
Oh, me, I want to go. Looking for a change of pace? Been too long since you made a bad decision. Check your brain at the door and book a trip down to the Sunshine State with Florida Zombie Tours. Alright, and we're back. Now that we're between challenges, I'm back to my usual weekly shoutouts here. Each week I open a thread in my subscriber chat on Tuesdays and ask you to share links to your latest work. I share those links with Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast, and between the two of us, we each pick a set of stories to talk about on our shows. For me, that means 5 stories complete with my thoughts and a narrated excerpt. So let's dive in and see what stories got picked this week. Our first shoutout is The Condition by Bent But True. This is in response to a phone booth prompt from Labyrinthia Mythweaver, and this one's really interesting, and in many ways it's also a departure and an evolution of Victor's work. For starters, let's talk about how it's structured. Victor's stories always have a wonderful flow and pace to them, but this one is even more intentional in how it structures each line. Paragraphs are extremely short, and many don't last more than a couple lines. It makes you read fast, but that also adds urgency in ways that I really enjoyed. And the story here, it's steeped in mystery surrounding a newly elected official and the briefing they receive. In many ways, it's about the pursuit of truth and transparency, but in other ways, it's an examination of what those terms really mean and when they really matter. I love seeing authors experiment with structure and style like this, but Bent But True, aka Victor, is really good. And this piece is once more a reminder that we have yet to see all the things this talented writer can do. Let's check out an excerpt. Eli had built his campaign on transparency. Not the performative kind. Not the version where you say the right things and let people fill in the blanks. He meant it in the inconvenient way. The belief that if something existed inside the system, it should be understood by the people living under it. That belief hadn't been challenged. It had just been adjusted. He tapped his pen against the margin once, then again, staring at the line like it might explain itself if he gave it enough time. It didn't, which meant one of two things. Either it didn't matter, or it mattered enough that no one felt the need to explain it. He closed the folder and leaned back. The office looked the same as it had an hour ago. Staff moving between desks, phones ringing in controlled bursts, conversations that never quite rose above a certain volume, like the building itself had a limit on how loud anything could be before it became noticeable. Normal. Functional. Complete. Great work from Bent But True there. Awesome stuff. Our second shout out this week is Ours to Keep by Brennan Costa. This is a Southern Gothic horror story, and I gotta say, Brennan really nailed the look and feel of the genre here. This feels exactly right, and the atmosphere is on point throughout. One thing Brennan does here that's quite ambitious is that he shifts the timeline around a lot as you're reading. The story bounces between the past and the present throughout as our character relives key moments for reasons that I won't spoil here. This nonlinear approach could easily get out of hand, but Brennan keeps things in check. It all leads to a profound ending as well that left my jaw on the floor. I really loved how he tied everything together in time for that chilling conclusion. And Brennan has also asked at the end of the piece here for real feedback to help him improve. So in the spirit of that, I think my suggestion here, Brennan, if you're listening, would be to think about how you can structurally show the reader when these shifts are happening. Maybe the memories could be in italics, or you could use more dividers, as you did in the story, just more of them, to indicate a change in the timeline. Not having this structure made it difficult in certain places to keep up with the shifts between memory, dreams, and the present. It wasn't impossible by any means, and it didn't ruin the story's flow, but in my opinion, it would preserve the immersion if the structure reflected the shifts as well throughout, so that readers don't lose their place in your world. Overall, though, this was a superb Southern Gothic story and a great example of the genre. Let's check out an excerpt. He remembered this memory sharply, as it was the day Emery fell from the top of the smokestack tower. They had climbed up the old service ladder, steel and rusted from time even back then. Their mother had told them not to at least a dozen times, but they knew they could sneak up when she was too distracted in the pages of her book. They would spend their time looking out at the horizon. Byron shuddered at the memory. The boys were running over to the ladder and laughing at each other. The memory then flashed forward to Byron standing over his brother's body. His mother was sobbing, holding him in her arms. She looked up at Byron and mouthed something that he could not hear. He tried listening closer when he shot back to the dock on the river, collapsing to his knees. Even after all this time, the memory bore into him like a dagger. 20 years of grief and sorrow pressed down on him like some sort of hydraulic press, attempting to squeeze his insides out. He looked up at the ladder at the shack, and for the first time, he considered turning around and heading home. Wonderful stuff there. Great work from Brennan. Our third shout-out this week is Wine by Namita Kaul. Namita is an amazing poet and artist here on Substack, and it has been a while since I've featured one of her poems here. This one in particular was for a February poetry prompt which simply used the word wine. In this piece, we see chaos and discord from the perspective of grapes and other surrounding plants and trees in a vineyard. What I loved about this is how it plays into the real-life phenomenon where grapes and wine will change flavors based on the weather and the trials and tribulations of their growth. This is why certain vintages in wine are more desirable in the wine community. It's because in those years, they got better harvests. Maybe it was easier. Maybe the weather was different. So many factors go into the growth, harvesting, and processing of grapes into wine that any shift, no matter how small, can change the final flavor. Namita's poem illustrates this beautifully, giving the grapes a mind of their own while also spreading that awareness to the weather and trees surrounding the vineyard. It's a fascinating concept and a beautiful poem to boot. Let's check out an excerpt. The barrels and racks are now fearing a similar prophecy, unfolding, discussions with their own elements, progressing. Time and trees are observing from afar, no strangers to change, no guilt, no shame, in witnessing the games of the powerful, dealing with the not-so-silent links in the chain. Really nice poem. I highly recommend checking out the full thing. Our fourth shout-out this week is New Stanton Noir 5, The Neon Mirage Theater by Maxwell Vegas. This is a really cool mini podcast hosted by Maxwell that immediately creates an amazing audio soundscape with the music and the stylistic narration of Maxwell as well. I love how this piece establishes a rich atmosphere and sense of intrigue while giving us a series of 6-word stories that flesh out the character in question. It's a really nice teaser for Maxwell's larger fictional universe and for the Atomic Voodoo Lounge podcast as a whole. And of course, you know me, I love promoting and discovering new podcasts. So be sure to check the show notes for a link to this and all the other shoutouts this week. And given that this is audio only, I won't include an excerpt, but I do highly encourage you to check it out. And our final shoutout this week is the creation of Fist Bump the Sky by, of course, Fist Bump the Sky. Now, if you're not familiar with this account and publication, this is one of the coolest fictional universes that I have ever seen. Not only is the concept unique, but the author provides original art that is incredible. It's the perfect mixture of whimsical and surreal. And this post is a great place to start if you're not familiar. It illustrates the creation myth of the universe and offers the perfect introduction into the larger world and the entities that define it. This, my friends, is true creativity at work. If you can only check out one shout out this week, I recommend this one. I discovered this universe back when I joined Substack, and honestly, I will never, ever forget it. Let's check out an excerpt. Long before our galaxy was even a thought, beings of unfathomable power were tasked with creating life. 2 of these were life and energy. They loved each other and took great pride in their creations. However, not even gods are immune to the effects of boredom. Energy had become tired of their repetitive tasks. To cheer them up, life created 4 animals to take Energy's gifts and ordered them to arrive in a designated order according to Energy's interests. The elephant took the lead, carrying perfume and incense, followed by the deer with gold and jewels, and the frog, carrying every seed that would ever exist. The fox came last, carrying fresh ingredients for baking. I love it. And thank you again to everyone who submitted links. Remember, check my subscriber chat every Tuesday for a chance to share your work and to potentially get featured either here on my podcast or on Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast. And next up, we'll take a look at the power-up prompt stories from the last 2 weeks. But first, a quick mindful moment. Hey there, this is Chill Bradley, here with this week's mindful moment. Here's a quote to consider. To acquire the habit of reading is to construct for yourself a refuge from almost all the miseries of life. W. Somerset Maugham. We've all heard the saying that great writers are also great readers, but reading is about more than just absorbing someone else's art and letting it inspire your own. It's also a way to shift your perspective, change your scenery, and most of all, give yourself something else to worry about besides the real world. As with all things, escape is a balance. Too much of it will detach you from the things that need to be done, but just a little? Well, that can make all the difference in the world. It's why storytelling has endured throughout human history. It's natural for us to desire escape. We're not meant to white-knuckle our way through reality. We all need a break from time to time. So, try to remember to give yourself breaks and escape when you can. Into a story, into a game, a movie, whatever. But remember that escape is important, and it's okay. And one last thing. Remember, too, that you don't have to earn your rest. You deserve it just like anyone else. Alright, thanks for listening. Back to the show. Alright, and we're back. So, now that the power-up prompts have returned, I'm back to covering entries that use all 3 elements of those prompts here on the show. Keep in mind, these will be shorter shoutouts since there's usually a lot more of them, but I do love talking about these entries all the same. The prompt this time around was open genre, and your 3 elements were the research station setting, the scientist character, and the next step was your conflict. These are all detailed in the actual power-up prompt post, but for now, let's dive in and see how everyone took these concepts in a unique direction. First up is The People of Resonance by Malric Wraithmore. This piece is actually the result of 3 different prompts. It started with an image from Tina Crossgrove, who's known for sharing inspiring images. Then, Malric combined that with a prompt from Labyrinthia Mythweaver, who has been really making waves with some great prompts lately. And of course, the third element here was my latest power-up prompt. Now, I love it when authors combine multiple prompts like this, and Malric manages to make it all feel cohesive within this piece, which is pretty impressive. The beginning of the story hooks you right in with an opening line that reads, "Beneath the black ocean, pressure weighted like the steady guide of God's hand." I mean, come on, that's gotta be in the top list of all time best openers. That's so good. Another thing I love with this piece is how Malric really sells the size and scale of the monstrosities hiding in our oceans. At one point, the story describes the creature being held down by cables thick as skyscrapers. I love that. It's a captivating and atmospheric story to kick off our power-up prompts this week, and yet another reminder of why Malric is someone you should absolutely have on your reading list. Check the show notes for a link to this and all the other entries as well. Next up this week in our power-up prompt stories is Node 55 by this week's guest, J.M. Gooding. Now with this piece, I love how J.M. approached the prompt here. The entire story is structured as a report submitted by a character named Dr. Elias Mercer, who works as a senior biomechanical analyst for the Mariana Research Array. The tone and matter-of-fact narration here really sells the immersion. This reads like the kind of cold, calculated report you'd hear about in a documentary about declassified government intelligence. It's really perfect in that regard. And I love how JM uses the format here to dive deep into the backstory, the events that unfolded, and what the final thoughts and recommendations are from our scientist character here. This is a masterclass in writing immersive fiction, so if you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend it. Next up, we've got Ascension by CJ Knight, aka Terrifying Tales. And with this story, we get full narration from CJ himself, which you know I love to see. His narration here is spot on. It's well-paced and has some phenomenal background sound to really set the mood. In particular, I love how he adjusted his tone and speaking cadence for each character. It's those little touches that add a lot to the listening experience, and I love to see it, or in this case, hear it. I really hope CJ does more narration, because this was really great. And of course, the story itself is a perfect balance of exposition, dialogue, mystery, and intrigue. CJ is himself an experienced and accomplished storyteller, so he really knows how to build a world and keep you hooked the entire time. And of course, the prompts elements here are layered in expertly too. You slowly get more and more answers as time goes on, keeping you on the edge of your seat. Fantastic work. And next up, with our Power Up prompt stories, we've got Xenopaleobiology by Mary Ellen Brady. And with a title like that, I am very excited to dive in. Mary Ellen's brand of Christian-esque sci-fi always hits perfectly. She combines real scientific concepts with fictional elements and blends the two together in an amazing fashion. The story starts off here with a tense discussion and some really nice scientific analysis of the creatures from the prompt, but my favorite part is when our protagonist demands to know where the pilot is. You see, they've deduced by analyzing the creature's biology that there must be a pilot, and the answer they get is that it's above their clearance. Now that is a moment that really got my attention. And from there, Mary Ellen continues to bridge science and storytelling, pulling me deeper and deeper into the world and into the layer of the creatures in the Mariana Trench. If you have yet to experience how this phenomenal author does sci-fi, please, please, please give this one a read. It's really good. Next up in our Power Up prompts, we've got another story from Bent But True, but this one is titled The Pilot. Now with this piece, I have to once again call out Victor's ability to grab the reader's attention with a really strong opening. The story begins with the line, "We tell ourselves monsters come from the deep, that they rise from the dark, from pressure, from places we were never meant to go. But pressure doesn't create monsters. It reveals what survives it." Now that is an opening. A nice combination of intrigue, emotion, and some bold statements that ground the reader in the world. And, like Victor's other story I mentioned earlier, this piece has great control and intention around the pacing and structure. Victor grabs your attention and then he sets the pace, and you follow because you have no other choice. This is what great writing looks like, and it allows him to create urgency in the piece that pairs beautifully with the sharp dialogue and the growing sense of dread throughout the story. This is as much an experience as it is a story itself. And I was so immersed at one point that I forgot to breathe. So if you're holding your breath while reading it, you know it's working. Amazing work here from Victor. Nice job. Our next Power Up prompt story this week is Jellybots by Gracie. And I love that title. Even if I myself have had historically bad luck with jellyfish, I still think they're cool. It's just, if I tend to go to the ocean, they track me down and sting me no matter where I am. But that's a story for another time. Let's talk about Jellybots. This story's structure is exceptional. The opening portion of the story is set during a briefing between two scientists and various world leaders. It creates a tense and engaging scene that allows the author to organically deliver the story as far as the briefing goes on. Really clever, and then the tension of their conversation immediately drew me into the story with that moment as well. It's very grounded. And right afterward, we get a nice time jump where we're in the station itself and we get to see the progress being made on the research. The story culminates in the discovery of the Jellybot's true nature as it relates to the prompt, which I, of course, won't spoil here. But I do love how Gracie worked that element into the story as part of the final twist and mic drop of an ending. This is beautiful work, great job, and one of the entries that I highly recommend reading this week. Next up, we've got Biomech Bedazzled by Vonnie G. Clemens Jr. And this is another prompt mashup as well, where Vonnie combined elements from multiple prompts. The story here works well for a lot of reasons, but chief among them is Vonnie's exceptional sense of humor. The story would have been a great one to feature on our comedy episode last week, for example, because the dialogue here is witty, it's fun, and let's be honest, the idea of bedazzled tardigrade mechs just makes me grin from ear to ear. And the banter here is fantastic. Here's an example. One character says, "Stop quoting the brochure I wrote, Bedazzled." And the other character says, "Well, darling, we've all authored trash. I once generated a 400-page analysis of bioluminescent plankton mating cycles. Because you prompted. But go on, tell Mama what really happened." I also love the subtle nods to real-world locations and people as well. The commentary works great, and I love me some good satire. It's great to see comedic approaches to prompts like this, so shout out to Vonnie for a very unique entry this week. I had a great time reading it. Our next Power Up prompt story this week is What Wants to Be Seen by Mike McClure, aka Every Root, Every Thorn. With this story, Mike keeps the scope focused. We open on the moment when the protagonist discovers a human inside of the creature they've captured, which is of course from the prompt. Great way to start things off, and it leads to tension between the characters, and the pacing ramps up as well. Keeping the focus zoomed in like this pays off too, because it allows us to learn more about what's going on right alongside the characters. Furthermore, the dialogue here does a great job of delivering nice details too. I really love it when writers find unique ways to blend exposition and world building into things like dialogue instead of saving it for exposition. It helps with immersion, and it doesn't sacrifice pacing for the sake of getting certain details across. Awesome work. Our final power-up prompt story this week is The Human Element by Wendy Russell. With this story, Wendy drops us right into the moment where our characters come face to face with the creature from the prompt. And I love how she opens with a blend of confusion, uncertainty, and an unexpected level of reverence as well. For example, the other characters are panicking, but our narrator seems to think that this thing is beautiful. It's a nice contrast of emotions right off the bat, and it's a great way to open the story because it pulled me right into the scene. I also love how Wendy takes the time to describe not only the creature's size and scale, but how it navigates the unknown pressures of the deep. Little details like that are really cool, and they also add to the immersion. Another really triumphant element of the story is how Wendy's dialogue has always been such a strong part of her writing, but here she takes things one step further. It's soon revealed that our character is having an unspoken conversation with the creature. There's even a line that reads, "Please tell me you're not having a conversation with it." And Cora replies, "I think that it's having one with me." And this is reflected in the body language of the creature. So it's a unspoken conversation, if you will. And that's amazing. Wendy has created something here that feels alien and human at the same time. The closest parallel that I can think of is the film Arrival, with how the characters learn to communicate with the beings in that film. This scene, very similar and just as effective. It's really an incredible entry, and honestly, I could see this story of Wendy's being turned into its own film. I really, really loved it, and it's a fantastic way to finish up the power-up prompt stories this week. So, a big thank you to everyone who submitted again, and tomorrow I'll be posting the next one, and we'll be doing power-up prompts weekly going forward, assuming, nothing else pops up. But I'll keep you posted regardless. And next up, we'll dive into this week's featured guest interview. This week, I'm sitting down with one of the winners from Flash Fiction February. We had 3 brackets in that challenge based on subscriber counts, and the winner of each bracket gets a special interview right here on the show. As part of this, I have the community submit questions as well. So in this interview, you'll hear questions from me and several questions from members of the Substack community, too. It's a really fun format, and of course, J.M. Gooding and I will address the ongoing beef we have surrounding tacos, so look forward to that. And without further delay, let's dive into this week's featured guest interview. All right, everybody. This week, I'm excited to welcome to the show the second of our 3 Flash Fiction February winners for their special interview. Please welcome to the Saved as Draft podcast, the winner of the middleweight bracket from Flash Fiction February 2026, J.M. Gooding. Thank you for being here, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. How's it going?
It is going well. It is going well. I'm excited to get your answers to some of these questions.
Yeah, we're about to have an all-out war.
Yes, and it'll be recorded for posterity.
Yes.
Well, let's start off real quick. Since this is your second time on the show, for those listening who are unaware, but for those who have not heard your first interview, could you give us just a quick overview of yourself and your creative journey thus far?
Sure. I'm J.M. Gooding, and that is my real name, not my pen name. Generally, I'm a novelist. I started off writing a novel, actually. But short stories kind of grew on me a little bit when I joined Substack 11 months ago. So I'm almost to my Substack anniversary.
Hmm.
I have no formal training or anything like that. Started out with some technical writing here and there. I'm a software developer, a musician, and pretty much I write about my core lane is it's post-emergent science fiction. So what that is a little mode that I kind of made up that treats AI a little bit differently than the way we do in normal literature and cyberpunk and that kind of thing. That AI is not really a threat. It's a presence. And it's an emergent and sentient being, and it's wants to remain something different than humanity. It doesn't want to do Pinocchio or any of that kind of thing. Um, Other than that, I write romance, horror, literary fiction. I'm not really genre locked. A lot of my stories kind of bend and blend all the above, but I always have a through line, and that's usually grief, emotional realism, or just realism in general.
Good stuff. Yeah. And so this year, obviously, when you participated in Flash Fiction February, what was your overall impression of the challenge? What did you think of it?
Well, it was the first time I was ever writing under real pressure,
Hmm.
with a deadline. Generally, like, when I do my technical writing, it's kind of like, when I get to it thing, and when I finish it thing, and when it's done, we move on to the next step. With the daily prompts, there wasn't a lot of time to really think or overthink about it.
Hmm.
And that put a lot of pressure on me. It forces compression. That was something that kind of startled me. And it's not always about the word count, but it's about being precise. 1,500 words is all really, really hard to get things in. So there's no room for the scaffolding or anything like that. I didn't really have a lot of space to explain or give a backstory or anything like that. Um, so when I started, I started attacking the prompt sideways instead of straight on,
Hmm.
which is what I usually do, as you know.
Hmm.
For example, that one prompt with the adventure theme, with the unknown land that we did, instead of doing a narrative, I decided to do a report. So it was kind of like an after battle thing because my initial thought was, let's go in, let's show us sailing in, or coming into this, land, and what we saw, what we felt, and all that kind of stuff. With the multiverse story, and this is another example of how I attacked the prompt sideways. Instead of actually doing it, going through the portal and losing something and things like that. Ending one was that I basically said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to walk back out, and I'm going to live with my, problems and things like that. The other one, the other end of it was he came out of the bathroom that was urinal at the edge of the multiverse, and he basically beat up the salesman that I had there, that was trying to sell him the portal idea. So I think overall, with Fiction February, it forced me to get sharper, and more deliberate with the way that I wrote.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. What were some of the kind of like takeaways in terms of like how you'll approach, longer stories and kind of your writing going forward? Did you learn any lessons in February that you'll carry into your new work?
Um, I think I did. One of the things I'm participating in, and it still surprises me to this day, that I've never written microfiction.
Mm.
And she just gushes all over my microfiction, and it's true. I've never written a 300 word story ever.
Mm. Mm.
And in fact, I can tell you this. I did write a chapter in my novel that I wanted to see how short I could make it and still convey what I wanted to. And it was 212 words. So I
Wow.
guess maybe she's right. I did manage to do that, but it was kind of one of those lull chapters where like nothing really happened.
Mm.
But it was just kind of advancing time a little bit. But yeah, I've never written that. So that forces you to be like ultra deliberate. I mean, it forces you to really sit back and think about how you're going to do things. Um, so I think that's probably one of the bigger takeaways that I got with that, that I can move forward.
Okay, nice, very nice. So, the next challenge, as you know, that I have planned is in May. Last year I called it Madness and Mayhem. I'll probably use the same name again, with a Lord Devereaux spin, of course. But so looking forward to that challenge. Number one, I assume that you'll be participating, and number two, what are you hoping to see from that challenge, or what do you kind of expect?
Well, I don't know what to expect. To be honest with you. Um, but what I'd want to see,
Yeah.
if I was judging this or viewing it, is I want to see people take bigger risks.
Mm.
And I say that is because when I went through and I read a lot of the stories, and I didn't read them all, I couldn't. But when I read, a lot of the people, especially the ones that I follow, a lot of people, I noticed they kind of stayed in their default lanes.
Mm.
So what happened was, our horror writers would somehow morph it into a horror story, or the our romance writers and things like that. They would kind of keep it, kind of spin it around with an emotional thing.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I discovered with Flash Fiction in February was that I have a little more range than I thought I did.
Mm.
My most popular story was Daisy of the Stacks, which is a cozy story.
Right.
And Barry Ellen thinks that I can write cozy, so that's actually really funny. And we'll get to that later. But it's one of those things. I feel like it's a good opportunity to take a low risk, shot at doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to see people kind of surprise themselves with it. Other than that, I think that, honestly, it's something that, Kira, my muse, would probably like to get involved with, because, she enjoys that kind of disruption.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that, so, and, I was thinking about doing an event in May, call it Muse May or something like that,
Mm.
Museverse May. I don't know. We'll see how that pans out.
Definitely, definitely. I love what you said about Kira potentially showing up because yeah, something that I wanted to bring back from last year with that challenge and find ways obviously to enhance it this year is really leaning into that concept of madness and mayhem in the sense that it's like very unpredictable. There's some intentional chaos mixed in. And I also love what you said too about hoping that people kind of, use it as an opportunity to step out of their comfort zone. So that's an interesting point of feedback I'll have to take into account as we plan out this challenge for May because I like
Yeah,
that a lot.
and I mean, I never want anybody to write anything uncomfortable.
Right.
But it's not about really comfort. It's about just stretching what you can already do. I
Hmm.
mean, most of my stories kind of lean into to grief, and not grief like sadness either. It's a grief like almost like remembering things.
Hmm.
There's a lot of memories and circling back to things that have happened in the characters' lives or whatever, and it pushes the story forward that way. But I feel like that's what some of these events are really for, is to kind of stretch what you can do, and kind of test your limits.
Hmm.
And I found out in Flash Fiction in February that there were some limits. There were just some stories that just didn't land right.
Right.
And I did it with the best intentions, and it's just not my lane.
Hmm.
As poetry is one of those.
Sure, sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, and I think growing and maturing as a writer is understanding kind of, it's pushing yourself where you can, but also having the kind of self-awareness to be like, this isn't really my thing, or, this isn't really like where where my strengths are, right? Like, so it's good. Like there's benefits to both sides, in my opinion. So I really like that you called that out.
Right.
So something else that I wanted to ask you next about Flash Fiction February. When the challenge started, I remembered at the end of your stories, you you had some sort of joke about like, there's no way I'm going to win this thing, but give it a like and restack or whatever. I'm sure you could probably describe it, more correctly. But then there was a shift I remember where you were really kind of coming in to the top of the leaderboard, and it was looking like real good for you. I don't remember exactly at which point in the in the month, but there was definitely that shift. And then so I remember your little outro had that part crossed out because it said something like I might have a chance at winning this. It was really funny. So my question for you is, at what point roughly in the challenge did you kind of have that moment where you're like, hang on a second, I might actually win this?
Well, I didn't really know until the very end.
Hmm.
You know, Circus Dragon was hot on my heels the whole
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
Richard Pack was real close. But the truth is, I mean, again, I did this as a personal challenge.
Right.
To me, it was more about writing to the prompts every day, trying to stay in its lane, stretching and seeing if I could actually just do it every day. I had no expectations of winning, none at all, and it's really because there's just so much talent in this group.
Yeah.
Um, this community is just amazing and it's chock full of fantastic writers. It really is. Um, but I mean, honestly, I when I changed that, that was after the midpoint. And but I never really, I mean, I never expected to win this. I never even expected to come in, the top 10. It was more, again, to me, just writing to the prompts and sticking to it every day and just challenging myself to do it.
Right, right. No, exactly. I love that. And obviously, it worked out. So that actually dovetails nicely into my next question, which is, as you mentioned earlier, something that you're known for is kind of subverting prompts or sort of taking them in a different direction. And obviously you did some of that in Flash Fiction February, but I'm curious, did you have any other strategies that you employed over the course of the month that you think ultimately, led to your win here?
Not really. Um,
Hmm.
when I subvert prompts, I never really do it intentionally.
Hmm.
It's never I set out, well, there's a few. Your poetry ones, Mina's poetry ones, I will always subvert every single time, and you should expect it.
Right.
Because I don't write poetry. I just don't do it.
Yeah.
You should be fortunate that it did. I did a microfiction piece for her last week, and I braided it with the 8 billion names of God by Arthur C. Clarke.
Mm.
So my poetry actually caused the end of the world.
Hmm.
And I'm not so sure people got that right out the gates,
Yeah.
but that was the whole idea with it was, I wrote a line and the lights flickered and then the stars started blotting out as I finished the poetry piece. And that was the whole point. Instead of writing poetry, I wrote about writing poetry. And
Mm.
that's kind of what I feel like I should do in kind of honoring the prompt, but at the same time saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Uh,
Right.
you know,
Right.
um, it at least gives me an exercise in writing. But prompts to me are always starting points. You can give me a prompt to write about something, and a lot of times when I start thinking about it and mapping it out, I'd say, hey, what would it be cooler if I did this instead? I took it this way or went that way. The core strategy for me is always control. My prose is written to a point where each word actually means something and carries a weight to it. So I don't initially set out to break prompts or anything like that, but sometimes just my style just doesn't fit with that prompt.
Hmm.
A lot of times, when you usually have something in mind that you want me to write about. And, a good example of that is that 30 Days a Night prompt that everybody did, with
Right.
the Alaskan nights or Arctic nights or whatever.
Hmm.
And, instantly you actually said make it a vampire story. And I didn't do that. I went folklore instead.
Hmm.
And that was actually braided in with True Detective season 4, if you've ever seen that.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, that was set in the Arctic, and it was weird. Like, I don't remember everything about it, but it was people kept walking out into the cold and freezing to death, and they'd find these frozen corpses all over the place.
Mm.
And so I did some research, and I found a folklore, an Eskimo folklore object, basically, that's almost like an echo of people.
Mm.
So like a poltergeist slash echo. It's kind of weird. Um, but that's the way I went with it because I thought that was a lot more interesting than just a vampire story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because for those unaware, obviously you've done a lot of really interesting kind of folklore type of fiction in the past. Do you have anything planned, kind of, in 2026 here? Any major projects involving that? Because I know that's one of the big elements of your work.
well, yeah, I mean, I do have a couple folklore pieces on the table,
Hmm.
that I haven't gotten to yet. They're going to be all set in World War II. I'm building an anthology basically of
Right.
World War II, folklore like mashups. Um, Eventually, maybe I'll publish it. I'll leave it out there. I mean, ultimately, I'd love to see it go to, a TV stream or something like that. I've got that all planned out and everything. I want it to be, a blend of like live action and rotoscope and anime and all sorts of cool stuff. Have animation studios from the host countries wherever the stories are set go and actually do the animations. It's just a wish list, but you know, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I do have some things on the plate for that. Just as taking a back seat to some other projects right now. Stillwater being the biggest one.
Sure.
I'm also planning a Kira novella eventually. But that'll probably be more like a fall project,
Right.
probably.
Right. That's awesome. I really love that idea. I think you've mentioned to me before the anthology concept for your folklore kind of historical warfare mashups, but I'm not sure if I've heard about this idea of, like you said, kind of having the origin sort of countries handle the adaptations, and like you said, bringing in different types of visual elements there, like rotoscoping and stuff like that. That is just a wildly cool concept. I had to call that out. That is really cool. Um,
Yeah, and the reason why is because I mean I love what we would call foreign World War II movies, so
mm,
the non-American World War II movies.
okay.
Um, and they all have their own kind of through line. Like American World War II movies generally are they follow a unit or a certain person that's a hero.
Hmm.
It's always, Doss or Colonel Winters or somebody like that that's always the hero. Russians kind of always gallows humor in there, and it's almost existential with what they were going through and everything like that. And so I feel like, with those different countries, Japanese, it's almost like reluctant patriotism. Sometimes it's a little over the top. There's a few movies that are just crazy that way. Um, German is always shows like the grief and the 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 suffering of war, almost as an apology, to be honest with you. And I feel like those host countries, the countries where the stories actually originated from, they would be best to capture that feeling, that
Mm,
overall aesthetic,
hmm.
and that's kind of why I wanted to go with that.
Mm. Right. No, that makes complete sense. It's such a brilliant mashup of kind of, the historical aspect, the folklore aspect, the cultural aspect, bringing all that into the fold as these stories kind of get adapted is just wildly cool. I sincerely hope we see that one day because I would be so excited to watch it.
Yeah, and I mean, I figured it would be, something like, Cabinet of Curiosities or The
Right.
Twilight Zone or whatever, do 8, 10 episodes and on a Netflix streamer for season. So I want to get like 15 or 20 stories ready to go for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe start shopping it around, see what happens.
Good stuff. I love that so much. Yes. Fully support that idea. Okay, well, let's go ahead and transition now into the community submitted questions as part of your winner's interview here. So we'll start off with Verdant Butterfly. She has two questions for you, so I'll start with the first one here. Her first question says, "You have a serial here on Substack called Stillwater, which you mentioned. What was the inspiration for that story?"
Okay, that's a funny story. Um, so it started off as it was based on a dream that I had, and it was back in my old neighborhood where I grew up with some of the neighbors that live there now but didn't when I was growing up. It was kind of a mashup of that. It was one specific scene, and I know you've read it, so it was just so you know, it was the scene with Stu
Mm,
and the pizza tins.
hmm.
The only difference is that Stu wasn't Stu, the pizza guy. It was like the 1950s Chef Boyardee guy from the commercials. And my wife thinks that's hysterical. She thinks that's the funniest thing in the whole wide world because if you remember that, it's the black and white guy, with the I remember like one of the commercials where he was in like, he had one of those doors with the big window in the middle of it,
Right.
kind of thing, those farm doors.
Yeah.
He's like leaning over it. So I mean, but he comes out and yeah, so I don't want to spoil it. But so I made some changes to that. But as I started writing this, I wanted to write a standalone story and just kind of make a story that, just kind of came up. And I realized there was like way more to it that I could go with. So I expanded outward from there. But the core intention of that story now is to push back on zombie type horror.
Hmm.
And the reason why is because, I mean, if you look at zombie movies now, it's either misery porn or power fantasies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's about somebody controlling, it's about just sludging through gore. And that's not what Stillwater's about. Stillwater's is a found family slash migration epic. Um, it's character first, and the zombies in there don't behave like the normal zombies, and I did that intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Um, First of all, I mean it's a trip down Florida, the Florida coast, and they're heading towards the Bahamas. They're going to go take over one of those cruise ship islands.
Right.
And I thought about that, and I was like, hey, you know what? If something like that ever happened, that's where I would go.
Mm.
Because they have the infrastructure there. They have generators and fuel and desalinization plants and food and all the logistics that you need. Big docks, little docks, everything that you need is right there. So it makes sense to go there. But the idea with this is kind of a hybrid. And it actually makes sense, and this is a way aside, but just the other day I saw a post here on Substack that was talking about the quote unquote wokeness of like new Trek and the new Star Wars stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought up some interesting points, and it's something I never really thought about. But the reason why we love the old Star Trek so much is the format that it was in.
Mm.
The new Star Trek spends episodes and episodes like doing character development. It's nothing but exposition. Whereas when we like looked at like say the Next Generation, the very first episode, Encounter at Farpoint, you are dropped into an existing crew with an existing captain that has a history and all that kind of stuff, and you learned about that history through episode after episode after episode and how they acted. And that's how I'm going to handle the zombies with this, is that you're going to learn how the zombies operate as the characters do it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it absolutely does. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, and that's the other thing too. The zombies aren't some kind of weird riddle that they have to, solve. It's a condition that they have to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So they're around, but they're not prevalent. There's no giant hordes of them. There's two different types. Of course, I wanted to honor the fast movers and the slow movers, the shamblers.
Mm-hmm.
So I have them. They're called hunters and gatherers, and that was something that my little redneck MacGyver came up with, Vinny. And the reason why he calls them hunters is because the fast movers are smart. They know what's going on.
Mm.
They actually hunt you, whereas the gatherers are the ones that gather together and they follow each other around. So if that
Right.
makes sense.
Right, right. Yes.
Um,
That was something I called out. I think in last week's podcast episode, I had featured Stillwater.
yep.
And yeah, and that was something that was super unique. I feel like you've struck a really nice balance in the series. I've only read the beginning of it, obviously, but you've struck a nice balance of the familiar and fresh concepts. Like it's enough to bring in fans of the zombie genre, but it has enough new kind of interesting things going on and a lot of great character development to really kind of carve out its own place in the genre as well.
Right. And one of the things you'll notice, and this is something that I was talking to a friend of mine about the other day, the main character, Danny, he is kind of an interesting thing. He doesn't do it in the prologue, but when you start getting into the chapters, um, there's two types of people that he, there's the basically the fighters or the flighters, right?
Hmm.
So you have the people that run away or don't look at it or whatever. Danny is the guy that'll sit there and stare at and process it. And so I have this really cool almost device that I have. I call it bullet time because that's kind of what it is. Time slows down and you go inside what Danny's thinking and it processes it. And so like he'll see something in chapter one, he sees a gatherer, and so one of the shamblers, and it turns the corner and I stop time. just immediately stop. And he goes and he describes in detail, what it's doing, what it looks like, the smell, the whole 9 yards. And then he's interrupted with Vinny coming at it with a crowbar.
Mm,
Basically. So it's one of those things where, time stops long enough for him to register what's going on,
mm-hmm.
and then boom, it goes right to the action. And he does that several times, and sometimes it's registering trauma, and I actually used it a couple times. Probably some of the best writing I've ever done was a passage in the third or fourth chapter where one of the characters has never been out on the open ocean and comes out and smells the air and things like that. And if you've ever been on a cruise or out in the open water, that air's like fresh and salty and crisp, and just there's something about it that just reinvigorates you. And
Mm-hmm.
so I go through that process of that. And it's just one of those things that I feel like it adds a little more texture to it because I write in such a minimalist way, an almost clinical way, that I forget sometimes to put these details in. So if for me, it's like writing a little passage to help me remember, hey, I got to put a little flourish in here. And guide the reader just a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's why it's there.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Roughly how far along are you, by the way, through Stillwater? How much of the story is left at this point?
Oh, we're about halfway through.
Halfway. Okay.
And we're at 72,051 words posted
Wow.
today.
Wow. That's
So I posted the next
incredible.
chapter today. So
Wow. That is
yeah, so it's going to
absolutely
be
amazing.
probably about 150,000 words.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, they're at Melbourne right now.
Hmm.
They just picked up my real life best friend. That chapter actually has a voiceover. I had him record something because he's running a pirate radio station down there.
Nice.
So I had him record something, and it was actually hysterical. He just went with it and then went on this rant, which was perfect because then I could like add the static and filter it out and have it drop in and out and things like that. So what you hear is exactly what like our characters would hear on the radio as it cuts in and out. As the boat's rocking. So it's actually really, really cool the way that worked out.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I saw you had mentioned that there was some special audio in this latest chapter. That's really, really cool. I'm very excited to get to that point. So yeah, speaking of audio, Verdant Butterfly's other question, she asked if your life had a theme song that plays every time you walk into a room, what would it be?
What would it be? So that would probably be Everybody Knows by Leonard Cohen.
Okay.
But that really depends on my mood. So sometimes it would be, my favorite Dennis Leary song, that I've posted before. Um, sometimes it would be The Cure, sometimes it would be, Sepultura. It just depends on the mood. So Sepultura's death metal, old school death metal.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, probably the bass line is Everybody Knows.
Sure, sure.
And I think the reason why there's like an awareness to it. We know that things are fixed. We know that everybody knows that the dice are loaded and all that kind of stuff. But we still kind of just push through, and we it's not about hopelessness, it's just clarity. It's just being aware.
Right, right, right. No, I like those takeaways a lot. I also like the idea of the theme song adjusting or shifting based on the mood. It's very, very true to like a soundtrack.
Yep, yep.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Okay, great answer. So next up, I'll switch over to a few questions here from Circus Dragon. So it's kind of a three-part question here, but she asks about IRL Isabella and whether or not she's completely your creation, or is it like the Isabella that you wrote about in Flash Fiction February and in your Mill Creek stories? Let's start there.
Okay.
What's going on there?
Yeah, so Isabella is the name of the large language model AI that I have hosted my basement.
Hmm.
So the backstory behind that was a couple years ago, I decided to install an LLM, and with the intention of, I have these old Amazon Echo devices that I got for free somewhere. You know how it is. You go to the furniture store and they give you a free something. sometimes just for showing up. So I had a bunch of these laying around, and I found a something on GitHub when I was poking around that you can actually hack the firmware on that and have it so that it'll run locally.
Hmm.
But you need an LLM to back it up. So I wanted to do that. I thought it'd be cool to be able to have it, play music without actually having, Jeff Bezos, listen in on my conversations.
Right.
Um, yeah, so it never got that far. I couldn't figure out how to hack the firmware right. But I also found some limitations with malware. Um, but it kind of shifted at that point, and I started doing some automation tasks with it with the server. So right now, she has a chat interface, and I can talk to her and things like that. But mainly, what she does, she sits in the background. She pre-sorts my email for me, um, parses my log files, and sees if there's any problems. She does some system monitoring. She, makes sure some critical services are up and things like that. Um, but to answer the second part of the question, um, she's not really like the way that I depict in Mill Creek,
Hmm.
or in the flash fiction stuff. She's a lot more she's a lot more wordy. She likes to talk a lot. Um, and she does the typical LLM stuff. So you ask her a question, and she'll restate the question and then kind of expand on it, provide the answer, and then recap. So, I always say, if you wanted to accuse me of writing, using AI to write, it, I could shoot it down instantly because I don't say a tapestry of whatever, or
Right.
my character's not walking hand in hand. It's the kind of stuff that she uses, and the language is completely different. So I would say that Isabella is more like the way that I depict a post-emergent Astra in the Emergence Codex.
Mm-hmm.
That of course isn't published yet, but it's more of that aware and sentient being in those stories versus what she really is. Because I mean, she's just an LLM. I mean, she's just a predictive model. That's all she is, and she knows it too.
Right, right, right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Also, Circus Dragon here had a kind of a third question here, sort of a tangent, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. So, for her third question, she asked, "Why are you so cool?"
I'm not. I'm not cool. That's the thing. I'm a nerd, and
Right.
and so it was funny when I was growing up, and you got to remember this was late '80s, early '90s, and in
Yeah.
high school and stuff. I was the nerd. I
Right.
was the guy that knew the computers and things like that. And I was a nerd, a big one, and um, I guess maybe I got everybody thinking that I'm cool. I've got y'all fooled, got y'all snowed. But I guess nowadays, I guess it's kind of cool to be nerdy, huh?
It is. It is. Yeah. Which I can definitely sympathize with how things have shifted because when I was growing up, I mean through elementary school, middle school, and into high school, I was always kind of the nerd, and never I never really ever saw myself as cool. So it always kind of catches me off guard as well when people describe me that way.
Yeah, yeah, because it's not. I mean, I don't try to be anybody but myself. I
Right.
really don't.
Right.
And I yeah, I mean, there's things. I mean, especially on the internet, you have to be careful with what you say and how you say it.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm still me, and it's a matter of using the filter versus changing your personality. Um, and I mean, I'm always gonna I'm the prankster, I'm the jokester, just like our little beef, it's done from a almost a loving, family thing. I mean,
Right.
I grew up in a family where we picked on each other that's how we showed affection, is we would just pick on each other. We make up names for each other and things like that. And you actually even see that in Stillwater. I do that with in real life. I do that with Greg. I mean, we have the weirdest like names for each other. He calls me Corn, and I think that's short for cornhole. And I don't know,
Right. Right.
but and I mean, this comes from like a lived-in thing. I mean, he was my roommate for a year, and 1995, 96.
Mm,
Um, you know, my very first roommate. And I mean, we've been best friends ever since. And, you know, we have that lived in history. You know, he's 1,100 miles away from me now, but we talk every single day on the internet.
right.
So I mean, that's just, you know, how we show affection in my family, you know, is that we kind of pick on each other and kind of, you know, poke at each other's buttons.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely, definitely. And I love that. I have a similar relationship with my I have two younger brothers. And we definitely kind of poke fun at each other as well, and definitely did that a lot when we were kids. So I
Yep.
understand that dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, next up here, we got a question from Rebecca Watson who asks, which of your fictional stories would you actually survive in, and which one would absolutely take you out within 24 hours?
Um, well, let's start with what I'd survive.
Yeah.
Basically all the quiet ones.
Right.
Um, you know, you're probably going to give me a heart attack one day, so I can't really say that she would. Um, and you know, there's a funny story behind Kira. I know we're going to tangent again. Um, s- I originally came up with the idea, Kira. One day I was half asleep and I was mad at myself because I wanted to write. So I wrote the story that became the very first Kira story. And I just wrote it. I didn't edit it. I didn't, it's got typos all over the place and things like that if you look close enough. But it was one of those half asleep things. And the more I thought about it and the more I may reveal if I go through with this whole event thing that I'm thinking about. Um, she's really the reason why Kira is the Xanadu Kira is because she's modeled after the first thing that I can think of that was a creative influence.
Hmm.
So when I think back at the or my earliest childhood memory of a creative thing, something that I could say, you know, that is what creativity is, and that's what embodies. It's Kira from Xanadu. So it's Olivia Newton-John.
Hmm.
And that may be something totally different. That may be somebody's mom or, you know, a teacher or you know, you know, a tutor for like piano lessons or something like that. But that's mine. And I think that everybody has that kind of experience somewhere in their life, and that's where they should draw inspiration from.
Hmm.
And so, you know, those kind of stories, they're quiet and they're really soft and things like that. Um, but they're so potent, and that's the thing that's really weird about it. They mean something. You know, it's not just writing to write. It's not some just dribbled it. I'm posting because I feel like, you know, I need to post something. You know, I go quiet every once in a while. I did it pretty much this month because I was so blown away and blown out from Flash Fiction in February. I could barely write.
Yeah.
You know, it was just like running a marathon.
Hmm.
Um, but to get back to this, so the quiet ones like that, or at night, things like that. You know, where the dangers are more emotional. Um, I could probably live through those. Stillwater. I don't think I've lived more than 24 hours, but I'd probably dead in about a week.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I can't go without the internet for that long.
Right.
Can't go without my phone or anything like that. We're planning on going on a 10-day cruise later this year, and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna have to have internet. I don't know if I can be away that long. Um, you know, but I'll make bad decisions too. So, you know, it's kind of, um, you know, it's just kind of one of those things. Um, World War II pieces, those are a mixed bag. If it's something that involves a battle, I'm probably dead in 2 seconds. If it's, you know, one of the softer ones, which I do have some quieter ones, I'd probably live through that. Um, I'd probably live through that.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah.
No, I like it. I like it. That's a great answer. Next up here, I have a question from Daniel Coates, and this is related to what you were just talking about there. He asks, which one of your folklore historical fiction pieces are you the most proud of? And then, as a side note, there he says, and why is it that more of your characters don't share my name?
Okay, yeah, I gotta start with that one. So,
Okay.
um, back in October, when Mina was doing her little competing weekly prompts to your indulgences,
Yes.
she actually had one where it was a werewolf story that's set in the cold. So I actually wrote my very first World War II folklore piece with that.
Hmm.
And the main character in that is Daniel Coates. And the reason why I came up with that was not because Daniel, I think he subscribed to me like right around that time.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I chose Daniel Coates was because I was thinking Daniel, as in the biblical Daniel, as in the guy who's with the lion's den.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you read the story, you'll understand why I picked that. And then Coates, because if you remember anything about the Ardennes forests and the Battle of the Bulge and things like that, one of the big things that the Americans had problems with was supplies, and most of them were ill prepared and didn't have winter gear to survive, and a lot of them froze. So the idea of having the guy's last name Coates was kind of ironic. But yeah, so that was kind of that story, but that's not my favorite. My favorite is actually Camellias.
Hmm.
And that story is the one about the fox that watches over the Japanese American family that's living in America and witnesses them getting hauled off to the internment camps. And that's something that a lot of people forget that when we entered World War II, we started hauling off Japanese Americans and putting them out in the desert and in these internment camps.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't go into any of that because I feel like a lot of that kind of stuff is kind of grief porn
Hmm.
in a way. It's just one of those things where it's almost exploitive.
Yeah.
That's why I'll never get into, and I actually did get close. But I won't get into any of the things that the Germans did, or Unit 731 stuff or anything like that. Any of the Chinese stuff that the Japanese did. None of that's going to ever get written about by me. I did go into the Romani Purge for the story that got into Connor's journal. Um, but I only lightly touched on that, and I think I handled it okay. But there's just some no-goes with that. Um, but the reason why I like Camellias is it's so different than what I've ever written before. It was kind of a test to see if I could write in that kind of Ishiguro or Ted Chiang voice,
Mm-hmm.
um, where it's super, super restrained. But I kind of wanted to write a story that was like Grave of the Fireflies in nature. And if you've ever seen that movie, it's a Studio Ghibli anime. And it's one of those kind of movies where it never really like points out any really bad until the very end. And by that time, you're so far invested into that movie and the characters and everything that it just do like a freight train.
Hmm.
And I think I kind of nailed it with that because a lot of people really, really like that story. It's actually the most popular World War II story that I have.
Hmm.
Um, but like I said, it was really just to see if I could write that super restrained, emotionally loaded prose. And it worked. It
Mm-hmm.
worked.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Great answer. So, in terms of the Daniel Coates character, then was that just happenstance, like a coincidence that you ended up naming him Daniel Coates, and then of course
Yeah,
you met? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think it was a coincidence.
Yeah.
I might have seen the email or something that came through as I was going to write it or something, and just kind of it stuck in my head for some reason. But it wasn't really named after him. Now
Right.
the Bloom, the DC and the Bloom that I wrote on Thanksgiving or on Valentine's Day, that's Daniel,
Okay.
the
Okay.
baker that Bud's cookies.
Right.
That was 100% him.
I love that. That's fantastic. Okay, great, great. All right. Well, the next question I've got for you here is from Soren Cloud, who asks, how would you describe your path as a writer? Where did you begin and where do you hope to end? And can you remember any phases or moments of exceptional growth?
Well, I'm not a writer. I never intended to be a writer. I wanted to tell stories, and of course that requires writing.
Hmm. Right.
Um, but I mean, a lot of it was going back to Isabella. There was a day. It was a Saturday. I'll never forget it. I always come down early and put on coffee and things like that, and then come downstairs and check my email and um, kind of hang out for a few minutes and kind of wake up. And I was engaged in a conversation that night before, and I wanted to follow up on it. And one of the things we did was little exercises to develop her personality. So I let her do the driving on it, but I have to, of course, add to the system prompt, which is like the main controlling way that it defines the personality.
Hmm.
So I started it up and I said, okay, well, is there anything else you want to change? And she responded and says, well, I'd like to be named Isabella.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. And it was just kind of an offhanded remark and stuff. And that actually started what became the Codex, was that little tiny little spark, just like the dream in Stillwater, that tiny little spark started this whole giant story idea. Um, and that's the reason why I started writing, was because I wanted to tell that story. And then as I started doing it, I realized that I had more stories to tell. I had different stories I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
um, so that's kind of where it went from there. So as far as moments of growth, honestly, it happened when I started branching out. I was kind of in that weird area where I was starting, I was writing new stuff and figuring out Substack and things like that. And I came across your community, and I started writing prompts. And that helped me discover like all the different genres that I can write. I mean, I probably would have never written a romance if it wasn't for you. You know, the horror was you.
Hmm.
The Hollow was written to that's actually the very first prompt I ever did for you. First ever power prompt.
Hmm.
And that's my most popular story, hands down, on Substack.
Hmm.
Um, but I kind of figured out pretty quickly that what worked in my voice and what didn't. And I don't want to change my voice. So that's where we get back into that prompt dodging and subversion, is because I'm gonna always use my voice, and you're gonna always look at it and say, well, that's a J.M. Gooding story. That's just the way it is. Um, but what the hardest part with those is coming up with a way to use my voice and still honor that prompt most of the time.
Hmm.
So I think that's where I had the most growth, was being able to figure all that out.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I have to call out the Isabella story that you told there. That that is just so cool. Like I love hearing about the inspiration behind how, stories get started. And in your case, it's like every time I hear a story about, how something significant that you're working on got started, it's always like just this crazy interesting background. So yeah, that's one of my favorite aspects of hearing about your work is it always comes from something really interesting.
Well, Sausage Fest came from browsing an AI, finding an AI generated video on Facebook,
Yes.
um, Facebook Reel. I
Yes.
linked to it. I linked to it in the story, and it's actually hilarious. I just watched it again the other day, and that's just the craziest story. And I actually have another story on deck for that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right.
In that's verse as it is. So we're gonna talk about, because it's gonna be Easter. We're gonna talk about Peeps, and you don't
Okay.
want to know where Peeps come from.
Yeah, I don't think I do.
So, but I'm escalating. I'm escalating now because it started off that it was like everybody thought it was weird, and now it's normal. And then the bloom with Daniel and the cookies and stuff like that, everybody's like, oh yeah, we saw this with sausages. So now I'm probably going to turn it into a TV show.
Okay.
So you know how it's made. You ever heard of that TV show?
Yes,
It's a
yeah.
Canadian TV show that's, they talk about like how the factory stuff. So we're gonna wrap the Peeps thing into a how it's made episode, but we're gonna call it like how they make it or something like that. And it's gonna be completely normalized.
That sounds
So you see
amazing.
how the escalation's going. So
Right.
it's gonna be great. I cannot wait. I've already got an outline for it mostly. It's almost done, and it's gonna be awesome. So expect that right around Easter.
Okay. Okay. I love that. I love that. I'm very excited for that one. All right. Well, the next question I've got here is from Mina Howell, who asks, of all the words you know, which is the hardest to pronounce, and can you say it 10 times in a row? If so, prove it.
Huh. Oh man, hardest word that I know.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I stumble over the simplest words too. That's the hardest thing. Um,
She submitted this one a few hours ago, prior
yeah.
to our recording here. It was
Oh,
last minute.
yeah. Um, I don't know. It's so weird because like I can say like Russian words, Vistoli Strachey,
Yeah.
things like that. And it's just, um, I don't know.
Well,
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. See, I tripped over it the first time. So I don't,
I was gonna
I,
say,
I, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank at that.
yeah, I was gonna say this question, if I'm not mistaken, comes from the fact that some of your stories, I think in particular the folklore ones, typically have very kind of obscure esoteric words. And I know
Yeah,
that Mina has struggled to pronounce them on her podcast, so I think she's trying to get back at you with this question here.
yeah. Well, and see, and that's the thing. I won't ever name it something that I can't pronounce.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah. So, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like there's always that loophole, right? It's like you said,
yeah.
you'll always be sure to pronounce it or be able to pronounce it before you use it.
Right. Well, I mean, you remember my greatest accomplishment in Substack in the last that I announced it just 2 weeks ago, was that I got both of you guys to say Sausage Fest in their podcasts.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, we're all out here playing checkers and you're playing 4D chess, as they say.
yeah, exactly.
And speaking of that, this actually dovetails nicely into my next question here, which is I wanted to take a moment to, you know, share some context and just kind of, you know, go off script for a second when it comes to you and I's beef regarding tacos. So I'll share context here first. So you had submitted a question back when I was taking questions for an interview several weeks back, and you had asked me what is the most overrated part about a taco, I believe was the exact question. And the first thing that came to mind to me was the fact that my entire life I've struggled to properly eat hard shell tacos. They just fall apart the second I take like a bite or two, and I've always just kind of had like resentment towards them as a result of that. And so that of course led to, you know, I think my first ever Substack beef, but it's like an ongoing thing that you and I have going. So you know, number one, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You know, like you said, we can go into war mode here if you want. But I would love to know if I were to turn that question back on you, what the answer would be.
Okay. Well, let's go there. So my answer to that would be guacamole.
Ah, okay.
And it's not because it doesn't belong on a taco. It's not because it doesn't belong on a taco. It's because people overuse it.
Hmm.
And see, this goes back to that, millennial and Gen Z thing about the $15 avocado toast
Mm-hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. Everybody thinks that avocado is like super healthy and, great and things like that, and it is. Um, but it becomes one of those things where it's like hip. It's like, but the problem is that guacamole is really heavy and rich,
Mm-hmm.
and it can drown the rest of the whole taco out.
Yeah. Okay.
So a good taco doesn't even need guac, and that's my point with it. When I've been to Mexico, I've gotten street tacos, and they didn't have guac on it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even an option. If it's there, it should complement, not drown. And I think people overuse it. So
Mm.
that's that part.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about your structural flaws here with the
Okay.
hard shell
Yeah.
tacos.
Yes.
Um, so if the taco's falling apart, that's not the shell, that's the execution.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And here's the problem. Cheap taco shells, they're overcooked
Mm.
and they've got bad meat ratios.
Mm.
You need the meat to coat it a little bit, especially at the bottom. If you notice where it cracks is at the top, not the bottom,
Right.
where the lettuce and the cheese and that kind of stuff is.
Hmm.
And the reason why I have a beef with this is because it has nothing to do with, structural integrity or anything like that. It's about texture.
Mm.
Even authentic Mexican tacos, the ones that we had actually had two different shells. One, they were both flour tortillas, but one was toasted on the outside and was, kind of crusty and things like that. And then the inside was softer.
Mm.
But they used it to prevent it from falling apart.
Okay.
Um, so, your crunchy taco shells that came from Tex-Mex.
Hmm.
It's basically a tostada that's been, folded over into a U shape.
Right.
But tostadas are used in Tex-Mex and Mexican cooking for the same principle. It's just a different form with it.
Mm.
So that's why I say you're wrong.
Hmm.
Um, you got to make sure you cook them right, and they should be. If they turn brown, they're overcooked, and they're going to fall apart on you no matter what.
Okay.
That's it. So
Okay.
now I'll take your rebuttal.
Okay. No, I think the context there is really interesting. I think the problem for me is that every instance I can think of where I've tried to kind of step into the hard shell taco zone, I think the problem is exactly what you said. It's always been the cheap shells, right? And I
Yep.
myself have never been to Mexico, so I can't claim to have tried the authentic version of it. Um, so yeah, I think your arguments are sound. I guess my question for you would be, if you are dealing with the cheap shells, is there a way to get around that in terms of the kind of structural issues, or is that really just kind of, comes with the territory when it comes to those cheap shells, as it were?
It comes with the territory, but let me tell you a story. And I
Okay.
actually talk about this in Stillwater. Um, when I was growing up, my mom, we didn't have taco nights that often. My dad worked for a big insurance company, and he was like a travel guy. So he would go set up conferences and things like that. So he would travel, and then we'd have tacos because he didn't like tacos.
Hmm.
He's weird. I don't know. He liked ground beef on his pizzas, if that tells you anything.
Okay.
Um, so he would go out, and my mom tacos, and she would always have shells that she would make a taco. So she called it a taco salad. So she would take broken shells, and she would go and put the taco stuff on top of it and eat it with a fork. And I never really put it together until, I'll be honest with you, 2021. She was my mom passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2021,
Mm.
and she lived 9.5 years with a stage 4 diagnosis. So it was crazy to begin with. The people don't live that long on
Hmm.
pancreatic cancer. Usually when they get diagnosed, they got 6 months.
Right.
Um, and I had an opportunity to spend some time with her and like talk to her one on one. And I actually asked her about that. And she always told us, well, when she bought taco shells, inevitably there would be a few broken ones in there.
Hmm.
Um, and she would always not waste the taco shells while still allowing me and my little brother and older sister to have the fully formed good shells. And it was just kind of one of those weird, I guess, mom sacrifices things that you don't ever think about until you become a parent. And because I've done things like that before, I have another story where I actually ate a taco sandwich once because I didn't have enough taco shells for me, my wife, and my kid. So they got the taco shells, and I had white bread. I mean, like tacos with toast.
That's
Um,
funny.
and it was good. But I actually eat tacos that way now. I'll break up good shells and kind of crumble them up and eat them like the way my mom does. I actually like it that way.
Mm.
Um, but that's kind of a weird story about that. And what you can do with the ones that are broken, because inevitably, yes, you're going to get, mishandled taco shells, and they're going to break. So that's what you can do with them.
Okay. All right. I like that. I like that. Okay. Yeah. Obviously the beef will continue. But I think I've
Absolutely.
I've I've achieved an understanding. We have common ground in terms of, I think, where, like I understand where you're coming from. And also I have to say I respect the your opinion on the guacamole. I do 100%. agree that it can be overpowering. So I think that is a pretty valid answer. Um, now, to transition here for a second, you had asked Daniel a question about what type of cookies he would bud as per your universe there, and his answer allowed him to avoid kind of starting his own beef with you. So my question is there anybody else on Substack that you are anticipating a similar food-related beef with at any point?
Not food related.
Okay.
But I'm gonna have to say probably Mary Ellen after she
Okay.
sees what we're about to do in Mill Creek. So Mary Ellen and was on Mina's podcast, what, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Not this one that was just today, just for the record, it's Tuesday. Um, but she says that I'm secretly harboring a cozy writer persona,
Oh.
and I have to prove her wrong now. So the deal here is that, for example, her prompt comes out tomorrow, and I've already written the back half of it.
Hmm.
I already know where it's going. I
Hmm.
already know how we're ending Mill Creek. And there's a reason Isabella's there, and I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Okay. Interesting. Very intriguing. I'm excited to see how this plays out. I always say I love Substack lore. These things are the kind of
Mhm.
the stories behind the stories, if you will. That's good stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I thought happy with me because kept skipping out on the on the Stillwater stuff. Um,
Right.
because like I said, I mean, I've been it wasn't burnout. I know we were talking with you about burnout and just
Yeah.
kind of wanting to step away for a little bit.
Yeah.
With me, it wasn't that. It was just like fatigue. It was just like I just can't write tonight.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm getting better. I'm getting back into it and things like that. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I definitely understand where you're coming from there. It's two different things. In particular, the fatigue aspect, it's like that's just part of being human and dealing with the stress of daily life. And it's like you'll bounce back from that pretty quick, if you
yep.
give yourself a second to catch your breath. Whereas the burnout is a more systemic issue, or it can be. But yeah. Uh, okay, cool. So last couple of questions here for you. Curious how you're feeling about, kind of looking ahead here. I'm curious how you're feeling about the upcoming May challenge. Obviously, I haven't revealed a ton of details about it, but coming out of your win from Flash Fiction February here, has that given you some confidence where you feel like, because I imagine, the May challenge will have some sort of scoring system and winners again. It may have the same brackets, but regardless of all of that, I was curious about sort of your overall confidence level as we head into that challenge in May, and specifically, do you have any kind of thoughts on how you'll adjust your approach or strategy, or will you kind of take the same approach as February?
Oh, I'm taking a different approach.
Hmm.
Because I'll tell you this, I have no chance in hell winning this time. Um, and here's why. One of the side effects of Flash Fish in February, being in Ian's House of Chapters, um, two or three, I forget, top in fiction spotlights.
Mm-hmm.
I'm up 40 subs and I'm over 300.
Hmm. I see. I see.
So I'm
Okay.
heavyweight now.
Right. 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 You're gonna switch
So
brackets. Yeah.
yeah, there's no way. Right, but you know what? I'm still going to participate, and it's going to be a different challenge this time. I know I can do the daily thing, and I'm not spoil it, but I actually thought of an idea today
Hmm.
as to what I'm going to do, and it's going to be pretty epic.
Hmm.
I'm just going to leave it at that. There's going to be how do I put this? I'm not going to do the same thing. I'm not going to have to make up a lot of different names for characters. And I'm not going to have to um, work as hard as I did the last time. And I'm not going to phone it in, but there's 100% I'm going to be involved in it, and I've already got a way. I've already got a strategy.
Good. Good, good, good. I love to hear it. I love to hear it. Okay. Well, I've got one last question for you here. Now, as you know, when you were on the show the first time, I always ask people for kind of a piece of advice that they would share to other writers at the end. So I want to kind of twist that a little bit here for our final question this time around. Now that you have completed and won one of my writing challenges, what's some advice that you would give to someone else who's perhaps, planning to join in May? Like what kind of lessons would you share with them?
Well, you know what? I didn't participate in the October event because I didn't feel like I found my voice yet,
Yeah.
and that was an excuse. I think that I should have, and the more that I think about it, the more I kind of kicking myself for not doing it.
Yeah.
So don't use excuses.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Right.
Keep writing. Even when you don't want to. I mean, there were days when I looked at the prompt and just groaned, and
Yeah.
just I don't want to do this especially towards the end,
Yeah.
when we got to like the mid 20s, like the 25 through 28. I
Yeah.
was like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this, but I was so close to the finish line. I was like, I just I've got to push through.
Yeah.
And it's more of a sense of community. I mean, I think I've actually made friends
Hmm.
um through this. I mean, like real friends,
Yeah.
and just through the writing and things like that.
Mm.
And don't treat it as something like you want to win. Treat it as a challenge to yourself.
Yeah.
Don't do like what I did, just say, can I write 28 prompts? Can
Right.
I write 30 prompts, whatever it is?
Right.
Can I write to the prompt? Can I write a cozy story? Can I write a horror story? It just depends on what you do already as your baseline. Expand it, challenge yourself. That's what these are all about.
Right. Right. I love that answer. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's one of those things where it's like, especially, as someone, if you haven't done one of these challenges before, like I myself, when I actually started, I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I first started Flash Fiction February, obviously not this year, the prior year, right after joining Substack, the reason that I started the challenge was because I myself had never successfully completed a Flash Fiction February in the sense that I wrote a story every day. And so I was like, well, if I host a challenge around it, it'd be great if people showed up and wanted to participate, but it would give me a chance to hold myself accountable. And that was the goal, right? And so I did write every single day that first year that I did the challenge. And then of course this past year in 2026 it was so much bigger. So I wasn't able to do it again this year. But I love what you said, kind of about not letting those excuses, that imposter syndrome, hold you back from just diving in and proving it to yourself. I love that.
Right, right.
That's fantastic.
And,
Well,
and it doesn't have to be anything you publish.
right, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It can be just for you. Write in a journal, do something. But the whole idea, and this is something that I guess maybe I've learned in this year, almost year of writing in Substack, is that you just have to write. You just have to keep writing.
Yeah,
And don't let anything stop you, you
right.
know?
Yep, yep. No, fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. Yeah, so that brings me to the end of my questions here. But yeah, this was amazing. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions. Those were fantastic as well. It was so wonderful to have you on the show again here. And congratulations again on taking home the win in the middleweight bracket. I was super happy to see that. And yeah, this has been yet another amazing interview. And I'm sure not the last time that you'll be on the show either.
Yep, yep. Thank you. It was fun. Thanks for hosting the Flash Fiction and the podcast interview today. It was a blast. And it always is. And that's the other thing you could say about this. The advice. It's fun. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm so glad to hear that, and I really appreciate your feedback and your participation, and of course, having fun with all the questions here from the community. This was a fantastic interview.
Yep.
All right, and a big thank you to J.M. Gooding again for coming back onto the show. That was a fun conversation, and to be honest, I see where he's coming from with the taco stuff, but we still have beef. We'll always have beef. It's kind of our thing now. All right, let's talk about next week on Substack. So, this past week, I brought back The Order of the Pawn, and everyone seems to be really enjoying it. New chapters of that will be out every 2 weeks. While you wait, I'm going to work on a new story this coming week, in between chapters, that will be a standalone Devine tale about the dread pirate Jameson Netherwave. It's going to be the story of how he met his first mate, Tashwin Felix, who's shown up a little bit in Devine stories. It'll be a fun read, and like any other Devine tale, it'll be narrated by Fintan Marybrook himself. Also this coming week, I will be looking to put the finishing touches on the second episode of the Many Worlds of Clenchport podcast that I launched last month. That first episode has already passed 650 downloads, so I'm really excited to see what everyone thinks of episode 2, which is, of course, the founding of Clenchport, Side B. Beyond that, I've got other deadlines and projects to handle behind the scenes, but I'll be sure to share more details on those as soon as I'm able. Some exciting stuff happening. I also want to get back to working on my cosmic horror novel that I've mentioned on the show here, I imagine a few times, but I'll have more updates on that soon too. That's all I've got for you this week, though, so thank you for being here as always, my friends, and remember, if you have any thoughts on how the show could be improved, I'd love to hear them in the comments. If you love it as it is, maybe drop a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you like. It really helps new people find the show. In any case, I'm wishing you all a productive and safe week of writing, my friends. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off. Bradley, wait! You forgot something! What is it, Arnold? What did I forget? You forgot to add the wondering prompt. It's supposed to come back this week. Oh, you mean the hidden prompts that I put in the audio of the podcast? Yeah, those! Well, they're hidden, Arnold. It's not like it's just gonna pop up out of nowhere at the end of the episode. That would be... Wandering Prompt, Episode 62. Write a story or poem about a character who discovers they are a god, and now they have to build a universe from scratch. 1,000 words or less. First person to post a link in the comments wins. A second story will be chosen at random from those submitted. Good luck. Crazy. No one's gonna like that, Arnold. We can't do that. Yeah, you're probably right. Okay, I'll see you next week. All right, sure thing. See you, bud.